Have you ever felt like you were trying to control everything, but still things just don't fit? As if you were driving in the middle of a fog, turning the steering wheel tight, but without seeing 2 feet ahead? I've been in this place too. A space where anxiety, fear, and frustration take over because, deep down, we want to have all the answers now. But it was exactly at this point of exhaustion that I discovered something that completely changed my trajectory, delivering control to God. And look, I resisted. I fought. But when I finally let go of the steering wheel, I found a peace that I never imagined possible. In this content, you will find out why giving up control is not a sign of weakness, it is an act of courage and wisdom. Let's talk about surrender, purpose, God's time, and how, even in the deviations, He keeps guiding with love. If you are tired of trying to handle everything yourself, maybe this reading is exactly what your heart needs. And who knows, at the end of it, you also say delivering control to God was the best decision of my life. There are days when we just wake up with that feeling of being in the middle of a fog. You even try to keep the focus, move on, but everything seems confusing, without direction. It is as if life has pushed the shuffling button. And at this time, the desire to control everything only increases, right? We think that if you can predict every step, you will avoid error or suffering. But what if the true clarity is precisely to drop this control? Surrender can sound like a distant or even dangerous idea. If I'm not in charge, who will be? You can think. The answer is simple but deep: God. When we trust the divine direction, things begin to align almost subtly. Small decisions gain purpose, and even deviations begin to make sense. It is as if, when taking the hands of the steering wheel, the road finally began to reveal itself. It does not mean that life becomes a detailed map of GPS. God often guides step by step, like the headlights of a car that only illuminate one piece of the road at a time. And here among us, it has a beauty in it, because it forces us to walk through faith, not by vision. This does not eliminate fear, it still appears, but now there is a greater confidence in those who are conducting everything. You may be at this point today, feeling lost, trying to find meaning in things that did not work, the doors that closed, and the plans they have shifted. But let me tell you something lovingly: you are not alone. This sense of disorientation can be the push needed for a spiritual transformation. An invitation from the sky to stop trying to control everything and start trusting. A good first step? Talk to God with sincerity. You don't need beautiful words, just real. Sir, I don't know what to do, but I know you know. This simple prayer has power. Start practicing this daily. Write down the moments when you felt more lost and ask. You will be surprised how it starts to answer, sometimes in unexpected ways. And do you know what is most amazing? When delivering control, you don't lose your way, you find it. Confusion does not disappear at once, but turns into a journey with purpose. And that's where inner peace begins to emerge, even in the middle of the fog. But to experience this for real, the next step is essential. If there is something we try with all our strength, is to keep everything under control. Plan every detail, predict each movement, minimize risks. But there comes a time when it only generates tiredness. The soul is overwhelmed, the restless heart. This is where the surrender comes in, not as a last resort, but as the beginning of a new way of living. Because true peace is not having everything under dominion, but in trusting who has all the domain. Surrender is not passivity. It is an active decision to say, God, I trust your plan more than mine. It sounds simple, but it requires courage. We live in a culture that idolizes control. But Proverbs 3 verses 5 and 6 gives advice that goes against it. Trust in the Lord of all your heart, and do not support yourself in your own understanding. Recognize the Lord in all your ways, and He will straighten your paths. There is a way for inner peace. Maybe you are trying to push doors that God has not opened, or insisting on keeping structures that He is already dismantling with love. The surrender, at these times, is like releasing the weight of a backpack you didn't even realize it carried. It is to take a deep breath and say, Lord, I surrender. And that doesn't mean everything will be solved instantly, but the tranquility that invades the heart. Oh, this is priceless. A practical exercise? Take paper and pen and write. What am I trying to control today? Then pray on each item. Ask discernment to know what you need to deliver and what you need to act. Sometimes God tells you to rest. Other times, He calls you to walk. But peace comes when you learn to discern the difference. And do you know what is curious? When we let go of control, don't lose the reins, we get directed. Because God not only knows fate, He knows the shortcuts, the dangers, and the best time for each stop. The surrender reposition us at the center of His will, where fear becomes faith and chaos into trust. This peace does not depend on the circumstances. It is the result of a life anchored in God's plan. Now, if you are starting to understand that this peace is possible, even in the midst of uncertainties, you may be wondering, but how do I listen to God's direction amid so much confusion? The answer may be closer than you imagine. We live in a noisy world. Everyone has an opinion, advice, a direction to give. And in the midst of this noise, trying to hear the voice of God may seem a challenge. But the truth is that God speaks, and a lot. The question is, are we really listening? The main way He uses to guide us is still the oldest and most powerful of all His Word. The Bible is not just a religious book. It is a life manual with divine direction for all areas: relationships, decisions, finances, future, identity. And the most amazing is how it is alive. You can read a verse one day, and weeks later, He says something completely new, just the moment you need it most. This is no chance. It is the Holy Spirit working behind the scenes. If you do not have a habit of reading the Bible, start slowly, but with intentionality. The book of Proverbs is great for everyday practical wisdom. Psalms help when the heart is heavy, and the Gospels clearly show what it is like to live with purpose. You don't have to understand everything at once. Sometimes a sentence is enough to change your full day. Write down, meditate, pray on her. In addition, God also uses other ways to confirm your direction: advice from people who live godly, messages that seem to have been written just for you, and even that inner peace that comes up when you consider it away. But none of this replaces the word filter. If it is not aligned with the Scriptures, no matter how beautiful it may seem, it does not come from God. Begin by asking in prayer, Lord, what do you want to teach me today? Read with an open heart, like who is about to receive a letter from the Father, and are ready to be challenged. Sometimes the answer will not be what we want to hear, but what we need to grow. The purpose of divine direction is not to please us, but to transform us spiritually. And as you learn to recognize God's voice in the Word, your trust in Him increases. Decisions, previously made in impulse or fear, are guided by faith and purpose. But there comes a new challenge. God's time is almost never the same as ours. And that's what we'll talk about. Let's be honest, waiting is one of the hardest things in life. We live in an immediate world where everything is for yesterday. And when God says wait, our mind is already starting to run marathons of anxiety. But the truth is that His time is fertile ground. In it, what seems delay is, in fact, a process of deep preparation, much more effective than any hurry. Look at the Israelites in the desert. The path of Egypt to Canaan could be traveled in weeks, but it took 40 years. It looks absurd, right? But God was not just taking a people to a land. He was forming a people to dwell with maturity, faith, and obedience. Sometimes the time it takes is not because of fate, but because of what needs to be shaped inside us before you get there. What to do while waiting? To grow. Use this time to develop intimacy with God, strengthen faith, adjust the heart. Instead of complaining that nothing is happening, start asking, what does God want to do in me at that time? To wait in God's time is not to waste time, it is gaining spiritual structure. A practical example: dedicate 15 minutes daily to meditate on a single verse. Make this a habit. Small seeds generate lasting fruits. And do you know what is curious? When we look back, many of the things we wanted back there and didn't happen, today they make perfect sense. Good thing it didn't work out at that time. We end up saying, God protects us even what we thought was good. Him time is not just punctual, it's perfect. He knows what He is doing, even when everything seems to be stopped. Meanwhile, fear tries to infiltrate, right? What if it never happens? What if I lost my chance? What if I did something wrong? But fear cannot be the engine of our decisions. That's where faith comes in, that daily choice to trust, even without seeing. And if we learn to see the wait not as a punishment, but as a phase of cut, everything changes. You stop running in circles and start walking with purpose. But of course, talking is easy. The hard thing is to really trust when the clock doesn't seem to hit hours. Then comes the next inevitable question: how to keep faith firm when fear insists on taking control. That's what we'll talk about now. Fear is treacherous. He disguises herself with prudence, common sense, protective, but in practice he paralyzes. It makes us doubt, postpone, redeem. And the most curious thing is that fear grows precisely where faith is weakened. It's like a light is out of us, but the good news is that you can rekindle it. Because faith is not absence of fear. It is a decision to continue despite it. Remember the spies sent to Canaan? 12 men saw the same land, but only 2 came back with faith. The other 10 were dominated by fear and thus prevented an entire generation from advancing. What we see is not always what God sees. Sometimes the giant looks too big. Until we remember who the God who called us. Faith is to trust that God's plan continues to stand, even when the landscape scares. In everyday life, fear appears in the form of silent questions. What if I can't? What if I fail? What if I'm deluding myself? But do you know something? Faith is choosing to believe that even if everything around it says no, God still has the final word. A practical tip: when fear beats, write what is scaring you, and next to it, write a biblical promise that contradicts it. The truth released literally. Facing fear is also a form of surrender. It is to say, God, I don't have all the guarantees, but I trust you. It changes everything. Confidence in God becomes a shield against the attacks of doubt. You start making decisions not for what you feel, but for what you believe. And gradually, fear loses space, not because it disappeared, but because it was replaced by something stronger: hope. Of course, there will be a day that faith will seem small, almost invisible. All good. Jesus said that a faith the size of a mustard grain is enough to move mountains. Do not underestimate the little steps. Sometimes courage is simply to get out of bed and say, today I will try again. Each act of faith, however small, is a statement of war against fear. And as you walk with faith, even between uncertainties, one thing begins to stand out: obeying, even without understanding, is one of the greatest acts of surrender. And that's exactly what the next step of our journey comes about. Obeying when everything makes sense is easy. The real challenge is to say yes when the heart is still full of doubt, when the path looks uncertain, and when the results do not appear immediately. True obedience is born on this ground, that of trust in God, not in the circumstances. And that is precisely where it becomes a concrete proof of surrender. To obey is to say with actions what the words have already declared: Lord, I trust your plan. Partial obedience is also a serious problem. Jonas tried to obey going, but not for the right place. Result? A very indigestible deviation. We do it more than you think. We fulfill part of what God sent, and we expect complete blessings. But the truth is that selective obedience is still disobedience. And God, in His love, is not content with half. He wants our whole heart, not just our actions. It may be that God is asking you something that seems simple, but requires faith, asking forgiveness, changing route, waiting a little more, silent, or even moving even without guarantees. At these times, obedience hurts, but heals. Because every act of obedience aligns us with the sky. And the more you obey, the clearer the purpose. It is as if the road began to open before your eyes, one step at a time. If you want to practice this, start small. Ask, what was the last thing God asked me? And I haven't done it yet? Go for me. The answer comes fast. Be a postponed phone call, a project left for later, or a decision fought by fear. Obey, not because you understand everything, but because you trust. This completely changes your posture in the face of life. And don't worry if obedience seems silent or invisible. The sky is eyeing. Every yes told God, even when no one sees, is a spiritual landmark. And constant obedience will strengthen you to say yes also in great decisions. By the way, God often uses obedience in the details to prepare you for something much bigger. And speaking of great decisions, what about dreams? Those who you keep in the heart that seem so your own, so personal? Yeah, there comes a time when even they need to go through the sieve of surrender. And this is the next step of our conversation. This is one of the most delicate parts of surrender, giving up our dreams. We grow up listening to run after your goals. Make it happen. You deserve it. And yes, dreaming is wonderful. The problem begins when our dreams saw idols, when we trust the plan more than the Creator. Surrender, in this context, is not giving up dreaming. It is to allow God to refine these dreams according to His eternal purpose. Sometimes God will say no. Other times, not yet. And in some cases, it will surprise you with something we didn't even imagine. But for that to happen, we first have to release what is holding so hard. And it's not any delivery. It's that hurt, which you do with tears, but with faith. The one who says, God, I really wanted it, but if I don't come from you, I prefer to be without. This posture is revolutionary because it makes room for God to transform our desires into something that really fits the mission He has for our lives. Sometimes the personal dream was just a shadow of God's real plan. Want a practical exercise? Write your dreams on paper. All, even the most secret. Then, in prayer, say, Lord, I put each of these in your hands. If you are your will, strengthen them. If they are not, it gives me the courage to let go. This is spiritual maturity. It is living with your feet on earth, but with your heart surrendered to heaven. It's not easy, but it's liberating. And look, giving up does not mean losing. It is often at this time of surrender that heaven moves more strongly. That's when we stop trying to push doors and start seeing the right opening lightly. God does not diminish our dreams, He expands them. Because when the dream is born in His heart, there is no mistake. He will be fulfilled in the right time and the perfect way. Only, on the way between the delivered dream and the dream come true, sometimes deviations happen. And often these deviations are exactly what we needed even without knowing. And that's where welcome now. How many times have you caught yourself saying, wasn't that what I planned? Life has these paths that change without warning, doors that suddenly close, routes that take us to places we never thought of visiting. But what, at first glance, seems like an error of course, may be exactly what God has planned. Divine deviations are not accidents, they are heavenly strategies to protect us, teach, and shape. Remember Jose? He sold, betrayed by his brothers, unjustly arrested. It looked like the script of a tragedy. But that deviation led him directly to the center of God's plan to be governor of Egypt and save thousands, including his own family. If Joseph had followed the natural way, he would never have come to purpose. God even uses the weirdest curves of life to put us exactly where we should be. Sometimes deviations come in the form of disappointment. That vacancy that didn't work out, that relationship that ended, that project that collapsed. But when we look at these situations with the eyes of faith, he begins to realize that behind the pain there was protection. Maybe you were not ready. Maybe the other was not ready. Maybe that was going to get you away from who you were created to be. In these moments, instead of asking why did this happen, try to change the question to what happened for. This change of perspective is powerful. It transforms pain into the classroom, the delay in training, the bridge deviation. And little by little, you begin to realize that you are being prepared, not forgotten. God did not get you out of the way. He is creating a new one with eternal purpose. Practically speaking, this requires spiritual sensitivity. When facing a deviation, pray, God shows me what the Lord is doing here. Seek advice from wise people. Dip in the scriptures. Be aware of the signs. The Holy Spirit is a kind, but precise guide. He knows when to pull you away and when to push you forward. Just be with your ears open. And do you know what is most beautiful? When your life begins to make sense to others. They look at you, see peace, faith, transformation, and are impacted. Its story of surrender becomes a living testimony. And that's exactly what we will talk about at the next point. There is something powerful in a life that has chosen to trust God. You don't even have to say much, just watching, people realize. It is as if inner peace escaped through the eyes, as if hope is stamped on the face. A life surrendered to God becomes a lighthouse. And even unintentionally, it begins to illuminate the path of those who are still lost in the darkness of doubt, fear, lack of purpose. This is the beauty of spiritual transformation. It is not stuck within you, overflows. Your way of reacting to difficulties changes. Your posture in the face of problems becomes different. While the world despairs, you take a deep breath and say, I trust God. And that, my friend, is more impactful than any speech. People approach. They want to understand where this strength comes from. And you respond with life. It comes from surrender. It is not about perfection. It is about transparency. Show that even with flaws, you are being shaped by a larger plan. That even with scars, you chose to trust. A life with purpose does not scream, she inspires. And this is evangelism in the purest form. Ordinary people living extraordinarily because they decided to deliver control and trust a God who guides with love. Want to make this more practical? Start asking, what is my life communicating speechless? Be it at work, at home, on social networks, are you reflecting peace or restlessness, confidence or control? To witness is not to carry a plate, it is to carry a presence. It is being salt and light, as Jesus taught us. And this is built day after day, in small and constant decisions of obedience and faith. Sometimes your process will be the key to unlocking someone else's faith. Someone can see your journey and think, if God has done it in his life, he can do it in mine too. And without you realize, your walk becomes a seed. Therefore, it does not underestimate the power to live surrendered. It's your daily life with ups and downs, but full of hope that points to something bigger. And in the end, this is what matters most, living with eyes in eternity. Because all this journey of surrender, faith and obedience has a destination that goes beyond this life. And that's where, well, look now. There comes a time when we realize living for now is not enough. The heart begins to look for something deeper, more lasting. And then comes the eternal perspective, a look that goes beyond this life and anchors what really matters. When we live surrendered to God, everything changes scale. Problems still exist, but they are no longer the center. Focus becomes what has eternal value. God is not just worried about giving you a lighter life here. He is shaping his character, his faith, his heart, all with an eternal purpose. Every challenge, every weight, every deviation is preparing you for something greater, to be like Christ. This is the final target. And the more we understand that, the more we rest. Because now we know that we are being transformed to live not only here, but forever with it. Living with eyes on eternity changes our choices. We start to forgive faster, to love deeper, to care less about what others think and more about what God thinks. This does not mean living alienated from the present, quite the contrary. It is living the now with purpose, knowing that each seed planted here can flourish there. This conscience changes the way we deal with losses, with frustrations, successfully, with everything. A simple exercise to cultivate this vision at the end of the day. Ask yourself, today I lived with eyes on eternity? It is not about perfection, but intention. Small decisions guided by eternity produce eternal fruits. And the truth is that the closer to God we live, the longing for sky we feel. Not as an escape, but as direction. And the most beautiful of all this? Knowing that this eternity is not an effort prize, but a gift for free. God has already prepared the place, the way, the future. Our role, just trust, obey, and follow. Every step of faith we give here echoes in eternity. Each act of surrender is an investment in heaven. Now the question is, will you keep trying to control everything on your own? Or will you live with your eyes fixed on the one who has all control here in all eternity? So what still prevents you from releasing control? What areas of your life do you realize that you are trying to hold on with your own hands, even though you know that God is calling you to trust? Maybe it's a relationship, a plan that seems to be crumbling, or even a dream you are afraid to deliver. But let me ask you, what if what God has is bigger, lighter, and more purposeful than anything you imagine? Today, the invitation is simple but deep. Choose trust. Take the first step. Start praying with sincerity, even if it's just a whisper, Lord, I give it. Guide me. and then observe with spiritual eyes how he begins to act. God honors hearts surrendered, and every small faith-based decision is a seed that can completely transform your life. Now that you know the principles of this purpose walk, what would it be like to apply this tomorrow? What concrete change can you make today to start living under divine direction? Think about it. And if this content spoke to your heart, share it with someone who also needs to hear. Sometimes it is exactly this message that someone close to you is needing to receive. And of course, if you want to continue this journey with me, subscribe here on the channel. Activate the bell to receive all next content. We will still talk a lot about faith, purpose, transformation, and life with eyes in eternity. We see each other in the next video, and until then, trust. God is in control.